Robert Storch has had a long and successful federal career. He's had some tough and sensitive jobs, including Deputy Inspector General of the Justice Department, then IG of the National Security Agency, then IG of the Defense Department. He was let go by President Donald Trump in a purge of IGs government-wide just a few weeks ago. Bob Storch joins me in studio to reflect how things got this far. Bob, good to have you with us.
It's good to be with you. Thanks for having me, Tom.
And I just have to ask, when you get this word, how does it come at this level and at this intense kind of purge they're doing?
So it was really remarkable. I was home on a Friday. I'd been working all day at home because I was not feeling great. Didn't want to get other people sick, and was home and napping on the couch. And one of my colleagues called me, and he asked if I'd been fired, and I didn't know what he was talking about. And so he said, check your email. So I went and checked my email and came back and said, looks like I've been fired.
Yes.
So that's how I found out.
It was from that hr@opm.gov or?
Yeah, no, actually not. So it was an email from the director of the Office of Presidential Personnel, and it said that due to changing priorities, my position as the Inspector General, Department of Defense, had been terminated effective immediately. And, you know, Tom, you've been covering the IG community for a long time, and you know what we do. For your listeners, who I think know as well, even the way that was worded struck me as really odd because we don't reflect priorities of the administration. That's not what independent inspectors general do. Administrations come and go. They have their own priorities. And our job is whatever those priorities are, we do effective, nonpartisan, independent oversight on behalf of the American taxpayer.
And what's it like just psychologically to get that kind of a message in email?
So it's shocking, obviously, after a long career, as you said, in federal service. But I will say this, you know, when you take a presidential appointment, honestly, that you could be fired, right? But it never occurred to me that it would be done without following the clear, specific dictates of the law. The Inspector General Act is very clear.
As amended in recent years.
Correct. Amended just to make sure that things like this didn't happen, right? So the Inspector General Act was amended back in 2022 to beef up the requirement that was already in there to require the president, if the president wants to let an Inspector General go, he or she can, but they've got to give particular specific case-related reasons as to why that's the case, and they have to give those to Congress at least 30 days in advance. And that whole idea, it's not a technicality. That gives Congress a chance, really on behalf of the American people, to make sure that someone isn't being silenced or punished for their independent oversight work. So it's super important, and it never occurred to me that it wouldn't be followed. So I was stunned when I saw that.
And you are party to one of the lawsuits going on.
That's correct, Tom. I am. We are challenging the legality of the termination notices for that reason. There's very specific requirements in the law, and there's no question they weren't followed here.
And they keep coming. Early on, Mike Missile, who was the Inspector General of VA, was not in that initial group. He had been appointed by Obama and stayed longer than some of the ones that Trump had appointed the first time around that were let go earlier. So it was kind of confusing. It didn't seem to be directly political.
Well, you're right. It was confusing. I think Mike Missile from VA was in the first group, but others weren't. There were 18 that first night. And then subsequently, as I'm sure your listeners will know, Paul Martin, longtime IG at NASA and then most recently at USAID, was fired the day after issuing a critical report. And that, what sort of message does that send, right?
Right. And to your knowledge, there's no one in the IG roles. It's all acting at this point.
Correct. So I can speak about what happened in my office, and I'm sure this is the case elsewhere, is our principal deputies or deputies took over as the actings. And we have great people who are going to keep doing great work, I'm sure. But the concern is, does this sort of mass firing of people, as you say, without any reasons, and people from all sorts of administrations, what sort of chilling effect does that send to people about the receptivity to independent oversight?
We're speaking with Robert Storch, lately the Inspector General of the Defense Department. And the lawsuit then really doesn't seem aimed at getting the job back, because if they followed the rules and the 30 days notice and the show cause, then the IGs, I'm presuming, would not have sued?
Well, right. I mean, there's no question that they could have followed the law, given the notice, and that would have been it. So the lawsuits do seek to reinstatement. unless and until the law is followed, right? So there is a path to fire an IG, but it needs to be followed. And ultimately for me, just speaking for myself, that's why I joined it. I've spent a long career. I've been honored every day to come to work and get paid by the American taxpayer to do the right thing. And as an IG, we tell people to follow the law. So that's what we're doing now.
And besides having the lawsuit in place, what is life like after a public and highly debated type of event like this? Does the phone ever stop ringing? Are the law firms calling, hey, we got a place for you, partner?
Well, I'm still trying to figure out personally what comes next for me. There certainly has been a lot of interest in what's going on with our situation and others as well, right? And so that's why I wanted to come and appreciate the opportunity. You're asking me to come and speak on the program here today. You've covered IGs for a long time, and I think you and your listeners know the importance of the independent oversight that we do in detecting and deterring waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption, in improving the economy, the efficiency, the effectiveness of agency programs at really critical places. You were kind enough to mention my own background, Tom. I've been so privileged. I mean, I spent a couple dozen years as a federal prosecutor and then switched to the IG community. And I've been in the leadership of the Department of Justice, the National Security Agency, and the Department of Defense, IGs. Those are all super important places doing really important work. And inspectors general, through independent, nonpartisan, transparent oversight, promote positive change that the American public can believe in and have faith in. And I think that's super important. So I don't regret a day of my career. I'm not wild about the way it may have come to an end.
Yes, because the administration likened this to something that does happen pretty regularly, and that's removing the U.S. attorneys as a group. I mean,
yeah, it's an interesting point, and one I've thought about, having come out of that world, having spent a couple of dozen years as a prosecutor. And the fundamental difference, of course, is as a federal prosecutor, you're not doing institutional oversight in the way that we do in the inspector general community, right? You're prosecuting cases, you're working with agents, but your job is not to do oversight in the way that an IG does. So presidents come in, new administrations, and they may have law enforcement priorities. Some may be more into white-collar crimes. Some may be more into, street crime, whatever it is. And that's not unusual. And that will affect the mix of cases at a U.S. Attorney's office. But I'm still doing everyone based on the facts and the law. That's what we always did when I was a prosecutor, and can't imagine doing anything different. But IGs are different, right? Because if we were seen as promoting the agenda, if you will, or the priorities of the administration, we wouldn't be able to do our hard-hitting oversight, and we wouldn't be able to do it credibly. And I can give you examples, just a couple of recent ones. One, we just released a week before I was fired, our report on the hospitalizations of Secretary Austin, the former defense secretary. And we, as we always do, hit it right down the fairway, and we were fair, and we gave the department credit for what we'd done. But we found significant issues where there were previously unreported incidents that should have triggered consideration of a transfer of authority. We found other incidents where there were transfers, but the laws and policies for notification to Congress and the White House weren't followed. And that's super important, right? You want people to know who the Secretary of Defense is and where they are if you need him or her. And so we made a bunch of recommendations to help to improve department policies in that area. And that sort of hard-hitting work where we're looking at the actions of people up to the actual secretary of the department and making sometimes critical findings and recommendations for improvement, that requires that sort of independence. You can't do it otherwise.
Well, even more to the point, if you're an administration, you would think that the IG could almost, if not be an ally, could ensure that the program you want does actually work.
Exactly
because of the oversight.
Right. In my career in the IG system, I found that leaders welcome the input of IGs because bad news doesn't travel up fast in the government, as you well know, and they appreciate hearing from us. And they appreciate getting our unvarnished opinion. They're not always going to agree with us. That's fine. That's not the job. But they get our assessments, and then they can use that to act. So exactly right. And even with regard to the current situation, and I obviously haven't been there and only know what I've read and heard about DOJ, but I can share with you the head of the council, the recently elected chair of the Council of Inspectors